My name is Peter Kimani, and I am a novelist. I can say I am a writer who served as a journalist. I'm a poet. I'm a playwright. I'm a jack of many trades. So my last public engagement was as a senior editor for The Standard, where I was head of news. I've published fiction, I've published poetry, and I've published journalism for a very long time. I am a university lecturer as well. That's how I earn a living right now. So the inspiration for the story was very simple. I was in a writing program outside this country. I was in Iowa, the University of Iowa, as a writing fellow. Maybe a dozen Kenyans have gone to that program for 50 years. So it's a very selective program. And I was just challenged to write a story because we had to give a public reading before the end of the fellowship. So I had to start writing a story. So the inspiration was that I had a story to write to give a public reading. The story that I had envisioned at that stage was very different from what ultimately got published. Because a book or a story grows and evolves over time, so I may have written a very different story. For instance, if this country did not nearly fall apart in 2007, because I was in Iowa in 2007, I returned home in November of that year, and a month later you have this, meltdown that just almost disintegrates the entire country. So I think our existential crisis is what now shifted my story to what it is today. That I wanted to go to the roots, to the foundation of this country, for me to understand where we were at that stage of our history. So I looked at the formation of the colony, 1890s, and then 1963, the founding of the new nation. So the making of the colony, the making of the nation, to just understand the complexity of who we are. So I would say my story has shifted because I started 10 years, it took me 10 years to start the story, or between the time I started and its completion, it was 10 full years, during which time I had a full 5 years when I couldn't touch the book, I couldn't return to the story, I had no way of writing this story. But I wrote for children and I wrote poetry. Maybe I wanted to get to understand these issues as a child would. When I returned to the story 5 years later, it was completely with a mindset that had evolved. But I think I wanted to write a story about Kenya and about Kenyans. There was a 10-year evolution, during which I grew older, probably more cynical, maybe more skeptical about humanity. But I think my exploration restored some of my own misgivings. Nothing had prepared us for what happened in 2008. I grew up in a very cosmopolitan setting, partly in the village, partly in the city, but I never saw my neighbors as different from me because we were all communally, struggling together. So enduring works of art take a long time. I'm not saying mine will endure, but I think it is true that works that are well meditated upon, that are well considered, take a while. And sometimes writing a book might actually guide you how to write it. So the release of the book last year, because it came out in New York in February last year, and in London in March of this year, couldn't have been a better timing actually, because so I released my book in February. In June, a new rail is inaugurated. Of course, the Chinese rail took much less to construct. My book 10 years, they took 4 years, I think, to lay the rail. By June of the same year, by June of last year, Indians of this country, the centerpiece of my book, are recognized as the 44th tribe of Kenya. By the end of the same year, you have a paternity dispute almost, because you have one politician called Baba, the other the president officially. So father of the nation, if you think of paternity, which is also a dispute in the book, you know, you tease out this question of who is truly the father of the nation. So there is a paternity dispute in the book. And then if you think about, you know, the guy who was stranded at the airport, you know, over his citizenship, and you have a similar dispute being played out in my book. So if you think about, you know, national history and how events that are almost presaged in my book, I'm not a prophet, but there were things that were happening that were mirroring, you know, my fiction. You can say art has been imitating fiction rather than the other way, fiction imitating life. If you think about now where the book was released, you know, in Europe and North America, you have anxieties about nationalism. Again, you know, the rise of Donald Trump, trying to assert who is more American than others. You go to Brexit, you go to France. All those issues become, you know, filtered in my book in a very clear way. While mine is a very local story, it had global resonance. So I wouldn't have anticipated this when I was writing. So I sent out my manuscript at the same time to Kenyan publishers, a few of them, well-known publishers. Actually, I have 2 other books that were published in Kenya. So Before the Rooster Crows, and a children's book, Upside Down, published by 2 local well-known publishers. I sent out my manuscript to them at the same time as I did internationally. The Americans responded and offered me a deal. I'm still waiting for a response from local publishers. I can only speculate. It's simple laziness. We become sloppy in the way we do things. We don't take things seriously. And you know, if you take you know, children's syllabus, if you look at reading lists in our schools, I think that's a small market that they're trying to tap into, and I think it's just laziness. The guys who put out my book in New York and London are targeting the general readership. They're not looking at school markets. The book will find its way gradually. Because there are people who are reading in schools now, in North America, for instance. But I think Kenyan publishers want easy pickings. They don't want to gamble. They don't want to market. They don't want. There is zero effort they want to make. They want free money, if I may put it this way. Because once my book was published, and the demand has been growing in this country, it went into 3 printings in America last year alone. So who are these readers coming from that Kenyan publisher doesn't seem to feel they exist? So it's very frustrating because you know, I have been all over the world, you know, North America, Europe, the Caribbean. I was in Lagos last month to show the people who appreciate this Kenyan story. But the country that's giving birth to the story seems almost indifferent. So I don't know if this is something that can be addressed or redressed, but it's truly frustrating that you know, I made a similar effort, you know, to entice the Kenyan publisher. Even after the book was published, I came back to them and I said, okay, here it is. It's a New York Times Book of the Year. So you're not risking anything. It's already being approved by other entities if you don't take your readers very seriously. They still remain unconvinced or indifferent. So we are getting to import the books. Did I show you the British? This is a British edition. So we are distributing this from London, and this is from New York. So these 2 versions are being imported. Again, we talk of job creation. There is printing to be done. There is distribution to be done. So we are exporting these opportunities to others. So it's the London publisher and the New York publisher who are getting these opportunities. I was taken aback, to be honest. I mean, when you think of the books that are published, say in New York, the New York Times receives 1,000 books each week for consideration for review. And out of 1,000 books, they select about 30. So my book was among those 30 that were picked for that week. And out of the 30 that are published, they pick 10 that they call or they consider to be editor's choice. And then by the end of the year, out of the 52 weeks, they look at the 10 books times 52, so 520, out of which they select 100 books of the year. So having my book being nominated through those processes was quite flattering, to be honest. So the reception has been very, very good generally. As I mentioned, 3 printings in 1 year in New York, getting a new edition in London. So it's been very well received. So the irony of it is that Kenyan readers are not indifferent. They are interested in the work. They are consuming the work. They are talking about it. I'm being invited to go and talk about the book. So it is the systems that regulate the book industry that are indifferent. The people are not. So when industry regulators or industry players have a different vision from the people, maybe you might say that's not restricted to the book sector alone. Maybe even the larger arts industry. Music, for instance, you have again a huge proliferation of Kenyan music consumed by Kenyans. So there seemed to be a revival of our own, embracing our own, getting to consume what's being produced locally. So I would say people are interested, but the booksellers and the book publishers are not getting this as quickly as the people want them. I would say there is nothing like universal literature. Each work of art, whether Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, or Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude, or Dickens in England, all these writers write about their specific experiences in a small space of the universe. So how do those stories become universalized? Because they speak something important about the human condition. So as I said, my work is examining what it meant to be Kenyan in 1963. It comes out in a year when Trump is forcing Americans to reassess what it means to be American. You have a vote on Brexit, Britons being forced to reassess what it means to be British. So you see a correlation between my local story, which is Kenyan and East African, finding resonance with other events elsewhere. And that's what propels readers, really. Finding fiction that speaks some truths about their conditions. Expect to find a fine story that's well told. As to what they make of it, I am very democratic. I leave it to them. I trust in their judgment to find something meaningful out of the book. Might be politics, which some people find, might be love and romance that people find in the book, might be about history and colonization and colonialism. I think in whatever they find, I believe they'll find some entertainment, which is first and foremost, I think, a bigger motivation to read anything. I've found very, very interesting responses to the book. I go to, when I was in Jamaica, I was in Jamaica for a festival in June. It's called Calabash. I found people who told me my uncle was a lawyer who represented Jomo Kenyatta in this trial in 1952. So your book is not just a remote history text. To me, it's living memory. Or I went to London and I found some guy who grew up in Nyeri, a Caucasian male who grew up in Nyeri, and he told me, my story is also your story, because it is my experience. I grew up in this space as a white person in a black land. or yeah. So very varied responses. Two moving responses, I think, have been one, a young Indian man who grew up in Thika. I met him in London at the London School of Economics, and he told me, my father sent me a book, and he told me, this is your story, read it. So he told me, I don't have to write my story anymore because you've done it for me. That was very humbling to find somebody who appreciated that, you know, what I was writing, although it is my story, is also his story. And then at the School of Oriental and African Studies, still in London, I met a Zambian young woman who told me, I have a book for autograph, but first I wanted to autograph these pages. And she had transcribed the entire letter, you know, the handing over notes from one colonial administrator to the other. And she told me, this is what spoke to me. And, you know, when I searched my story, I couldn't quite find what was moving about this letter. And she told me when she read it, it moved her to tears. And even when she was speaking, she was on the verge of tears, more tears. So that's been a very surprising response. And she told me that's what spoke to her experience as a Zambian person growing up in Lusaka. And now meeting her in London, she said that's what I value the most about the book. So I think one misconception has been about the place of women. Some say, you know, women are not positioned dominantly or in dominant positions in this text. But I say I was being faithful to the period. So one has to be conscious. You know, 1890s, for instance, no British woman would have been sent abroad to represent England. And that was part of my research. In fact, one of the characters I revised had been a woman, and I was told no. My early readers told me this couldn't have been possible because women were not in public service at that stage of British civilization. And I say, you know, women couldn't vote in Britain until 1919, and they couldn't vote in this country until, or own property until 1979. That's basically 40 years ago. So that has been a misconception. But then the women in the story are actually very, very powerful. If you think about it, without giving away the plot, you can see Fatima is really the centerpiece of Babu's prosperity, because it's her small enterprise that gives birth to Babu's larger business success. I'm actually just, I concluded a new anthology. I just concluded a new anthology that's going to be published. It's a dozen writers from this country. I'm going to edit, or I've been editing an anthology called the Nairobi Noah. So it is the less known history of this city as envisioned by its dwellers. So, so that's going to be out in June next year, inshallah. I can say in one collection, this hasn't been precedented, but I have generations of all Kenyan writers put together. Ngoge wa Thiong'o, who is 80, is one of the contributors, and maybe the youngest contributor is about 23. So we have 60 years of Kenyan fiction in one collection. And then I have my own new fiction that's in the making. I have drafts of my new work, another historical text set in 1991 in Kenya. It's going to be my first book that's set in Nairobi. All my other works are set outside Nairobi. So the city that I grew up in, I'm finally paying tribute to my hood. It's called California with a K. And you know, God willing, I am going to plow through and see if I can finish this this coming year. So I am pushing on. Pole pole.